Deep inside the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, American soldiers came to understand a terrifying reality. Not every enemy carried a rifle. They'd trained endlessly for ambushes, tunnels, booby traps, and guerrilla warfare. They were mentally prepared to fight an enemy that blended into villages, trees, and shadows during the Vietnam War. What they were not prepared for was becoming prey. Unseen beneath a thick jungle canopy, something ancient and patient watched their movements. Indochinese, a tiger. Massive, silent, intelligent, and perfectly evolved for this environment. The tiger was not part of any battle plan, but it became part of the war. For many units, Vietnam turned into two wars at once, one against the Viet Cong, and another against nature. S.A. Apex Predator. A jungle that never slept. Vietnam's jungles were nothing like anything most American soldiers had ever known. Vegetation was so thick that vision often ended just a few feet ahead. The heat crushed the body during the day, while the night brought cold, moisture, and strange sounds that echoed endlessly. At night, the jungle transformed. Insects screamed, branches cracked, something heavy moved just beyond the firelight. Soldiers reported hearing slow, deliberate footsteps circling their camps. Not hurried, not careless, calculated. Then came the silence. Men began to vanish. Disappearances without gunfire at first. Commanders assumed enemy action. Perhaps a sniper, a Viet Cong raid, maybe even desertion. But there were no shots fired, no alarms triggered, no signs of struggle until morning. Boots left behind, a thorn, sleeve, blood trails leading into vegetation too dense to follow. Eventually, bodies were found, sometimes days later, showing wounds that clearly weren't caused by bullets or shrapnel. Something else was operating in the jungle. The tigers learned to hunt soldiers. Tigers were not new to Vietnam. Local villagers had lived with them for centuries. What was new was the sudden arrival of thousands of loud, exhausted men cutting paths through hunting territory. The Indochinese tiger did not attack blindly. Veteran testimonies and declassified reports suggest tigers studied American behavior. They watched patrol schedules. They learned where sentries stood. They recognized predictable human routines. Some patrols reported seeing massive paw prints circling their positions for days, never attacking, only observing. Then, at the perfect moment, the tiger struck. Breaking through secure perimeters, American camps were fortified with barbed wire, trip flares, sandbags, and armed guards. Against human enemies, these measures worked reasonably well. Against tigers, they often didn't. Tigers were able to move low and silent, stepping carefully between obstacles. Their attacks were fast, violent, and precise, aimed at the neck or upper torso. Many sentries were taken before they could make a sound. In some cases, soldiers were dragged from foxholes or sleeping positions without waking nearby men. One veteran later described it simply. It didn't feel like an attack. It felt like being erased. 5 tigers, widespread fear. In certain operational zones, intelligence reports identified as few as 5 adult tigers responsible for repeated incidents across large areas. Yet these few animals created fear far beyond their numbers. Why? Because soldiers couldn't fight what they couldn't see. Gunfire didn't scare a tiger unless it was immediate and close. Warning shots meant nothing. The jungle absorbed sound, hiding, direction, and distance. Unlike human enemies, tigers didn't retreat under pressure. They waited. The psychological war, the mental strain, was immense. Military psychiatrists later documented cases of what they called predator-induced trauma, fear fundamentally different from combat stress. Soldiers weren't just afraid of dying, they were afraid of being watched. Sleep deprivation became widespread. Many soldiers refused to sleep fully, even inside camps. Some insisted on sitting upright with weapons in hand. This constant tension created what veterans later named perimena anxiety. Belief that danger was always just outside the light. Men fired into the jungle at night simply to feel control again. Others stopped speaking altogether. Commanders, facing the uncontrollable leadership training, prepared officers to fight human enemies. They did not prepare them for tigers. Officers quietly adjusted procedures. Some increased sentry rotations, Others ordered fires to be kept burning longer, knowing flame was one of the few reliable deterrents. Still, attacks continued. One officer later admitted in an interview, "I could plan against the Viet Cong. I couldn't plan against something that didn't care about my plans." Why this was never publicized, tiger attacks were rarely discussed openly during the war. There were several reasons. First, morale. Admitting that soldiers were being hunted by animals undermined confidence. Second, credibility. Command feared stories would sound exaggerated or unbelievable. Third, control. The idea that modern military power could be helpless against nature was deeply uncomfortable. Official documents often used vague language like environmental loss or non-hostile casualty. Hollywood ignored it. History books skipped it. Veterans remembered it clearly. The war didn't end at home for many soldiers. The jungle followed them back. Years after returning home, veterans reported nightmares that had nothing to do with firefights. Instead, they dreamed of being watched, stalked, chased without seeing their pursuer. Some avoided forests entirely. Others slept with lights on. A few admitted they still listened for footsteps that weren't there. Psychologists later noted that this type of trauma connected to something ancient, the fear of losing humanity's place at the top of the food chain. A reminder humans rarely face modern warfare assumes dominance through technology. Vietnam shattered that assumption. The jungle did not care about rank, training, or firepower. It did not recognize borders or ceasefires. It simply existed and hunted when opportunity appeared. For a brief moment in history, highly trained soldiers experienced something humanity had largely forgotten. What it feels like to be prey. Why this story matters. This is not myth. It is not exaggeration, and it is not Hollywood storytelling. It is a forgotten layer of the Vietnam War, one that reveals how fragile control truly is when humans enter environments that don't belong to them. The jungle didn't choose sides. It simply reminded everyone who had lived there long before the war began. And for the men who survived, that lesson never ended when the